This is for all my pastors and leaders in the church, because I don't need to tell you, we are in some turbulent times, keeping congregations together, hot topic issues we're dealing with on a constant basis, not to mention burnout. And so in light of that, I want to offer you some resources to help us navigate these difficult times. Now, these books will be for you if you want to lead them with your staff, or you want to start a book study within to offer some resources for your community members. I have 6 books here, and I will briefly explain each one so that you can know what it is, and maybe you could leaf through it and get it yourself. So without further ado, let's start with this book, because I have a video already set up on my YouTube channel about this. This is The Gift of Being Yourself, The Sacred Call to Self-Discovery, David Benner. David Benner, in his book, so this is all about living from the deeper, truer self, and all these books are in some way about digging deep into the reality of our day and age, as well as the reality of our own condition, our own soul, and getting deeper into into who we are. And there's tons of quotable quote here. This would be a wonderful book study for your leaders, for your congregation members, for yourself. And it's not short, it's not long, but it's full of deep and meaningful truths. Great on-ramp to getting into some deeper topics and digging down deep into what's going on within our heart and soul. Here Benner has a quote: "Christian spirituality involves a transformation of the self that occurs only when God and the self are both deeply known." So right away, I'm seeing Psalm 139. The Spirit is searching the things of God and is searching the things in us. Search me and know my anxious thoughts. Lead me in the way of everlasting. And this book will help you on that journey. One of the things that stood out for me from this book was how he said the failure of leadership in the church is that the leaders don't know themselves. And the consequences we've seen of not really knowing what's going on within are extremely high. So I cannot recommend this book enough for those who see this as an issue of not knowing what's going on within the human heart, and finding a way to access what's going on within in a safe and loving relationship with the Lord and with each other. The second book I have is really just for leaders. This is the Pursuing God's Will Together, a discernment practice for leadership groups. This is by Ruth Barton, and she has a transforming center. So again, the theme of transformation. And this is what you would want. This is the kind of book that you would want to say, hey, I want to go deeper with my staff. I want to find out how we can make our church a richer, deeper experience in community life, but I don't know how to get there. This is the book you wanted to use. And I've used this with a small group, and I used a spiritual director to help me guide through the practice. So I highly recommend that in conjunction with this, because a lot of the things that we see within our churches is partially to do with the insular nature. We don't have an outside perspective leading and guiding us to see where our blind spots are. So if you have an outside voice, someone from outside the community, a leader, a spiritual director that can lead you through this book, I recommend that, because that will really help in your transformation. The next book I found in the free little library across from my street, and this is Joyful Exiles, Life in Christ on the Dangerous Edge of Things by James M. Houston. This is one of these books that I feel like God gave to me. It's got Robert Mulholland on the back. It's a formatio book from, if you are not familiar with this press, I haven't been disappointed by the books that they've been publishing. David Benner is even quoted on the back of this. I had not heard of Houston, but when I read this book, right away what gripped me, it's about living I'm in the world but not of the world, in concrete, in real ways, discussing what it means to be a Christian and set apart within the culture itself. And what's so compelling about this book is that the author writes in the preface that he didn't really want to write this book, but a Christian mentor on his deathbed told him, you have to share this information. You have to share this information. So he went out on a limb and did it. And it was it rang with truth again and again. So this is a good one because it has it's almost like miniature essays. So you could go in and read one, share it with your leadership team, discuss it, and then move through it in that way. So highly recommend. This book, Sex and the iWorld, Rethinking Relationships Beyond the Age of Individualism by Dale Kuehne. This is a book that's going to tell you how we ended up here. How we ended up in a Western society that is hell-bent on individual growth, about the obsession with the self, and then the pitfalls of that problem. And what I really like about what he has to offer, he's a professor of political science. It's very readable. And for me, the light bulbs came on with this book because it did explain what we're seeing in culture right now. In my own experience, he calls the world before the I world the T world, the traditional world. And the traditional world is based on a set of values and culture and gender relationships and gender that was boxed in and understood. And there were pitfalls to that as well, because you don't have the creativity, you don't have the self-expression. Like, how many people, you think of there's a few examples, but you can think of the archetype of the 1950s housewife that could only be a wife and mother and couldn't move beyond that particular role because it was a traditional world construct. Well, now we have the opposite pendulum swing of being completely obsessed with individual growth and exponential growth and freedom, the highest good being that of personal freedoms. But unfortunately, that's not what, as human beings, we ultimately want. What we ultimately want is relationships. We want to be connected. And what he points out so clearly in the book is that, well, partially, this is one of the points, is that we actually give up our freedoms to be in relationship. How many of us sacrifice for children, for that spouse, and that somehow makes us happier in the long run. And so I really like how he paints both the traditional world. He makes a lot of good points about the individual world, where we're at, maybe some prophetic information about where he thinks we might be going if we continue on this track of individual freedoms as the main important thing. And then he says what we really need is the our world, the world based on relationships and how we do relationships well. And what I've seen in my own experience is that if the church started talking about how we do relationships well, how do I have a relationship with myself, how I have a relationship with God well as a starting place, and then move into friendships and dating relationships and marriage relationships, and focus on how we are connected between each other, I think we're moving in some really practical and important territory, because these are the questions people want to know. Particularly in the age of technology, where we are seemingly connected but very disconnected at the same time. So if you want to know what's going on, read some Dale. Okay, now it's getting real. Rings of Fire by Leonard Sweet. Walking in Faith Through a Volcanic Future. So Leonard Sweet is a semiotics professor, which means he basically reads everything and then sees what patterns are there. So if you don't want to do that work, just read his book. And this book is for our time. I think it's his most recent book. Well, it's 2019, so 3 years old. But just listen to some of the things that he's talking about. Hostile culture. He's talking about revolutions and the collapse of nation states. He's talking about Chinification, world religions, public sphere, tolerance of diversity, suicide culture, gender and gendering, secularism, and the list goes on and on. He's got 3 parts: hot zones, hot topics, and hot church. And he talks about what are all the issues that the church is facing today. And it is not for the faint of heart, because it's talking about all of the things that we're experiencing. But if you're ready for that, if you're ready saying, okay, I see these volcanoes erupting all around me, I'm gonna be part of a volcanic eruption, and I want to know the nature of it and how to deal with it, then this would be a good starting place for you and your team. The last book I have here is not a new book. It is Edwin Friedman and the Failure of Nerve. Now this is, see, it says like it's the revised edition, 10-year anniversary. It's a very popular book, and it's a leadership in the age of quick fix. And I've read many books who have quoted this book. And I mean, to distill it down into just a few sentences is to say that it's talking about leadership as a way of being differentiated, or like I would say maybe properly oriented to the people around you. And so it also talks about how we need to not be afraid of risks and going out into the unknown. Well, we're in a situation right now where it's unknown territory. And so this book can help you to dig deeper into that. There's a few things about this book that I'm struggling with. It's super dense. I found it hard to read because it was pretty, some of it was a bit beyond me. But there's quotes and pop-outs on every page where you can think about and process. So I had to like move slowly through the book. The other thing is that there's this dimension, well, even just it has a bit of a negative connotation, a failure of nerve. It's right there in the title. It's saying we're failing to be the leaders we need to be. And while that is true, I have found that it has been better to be motivated by positivity rather than negativity. And it doesn't have a Christ component to lead us in that transformation process, which I think is the piece that we need. That Christ, it isn't about us performing well to get to where we need to go. It's about us trusting God's leadership and developing a relationship with Him that transcends our circumstances and says, it's not what I do, it is my relationship with God that matters the most. And am I being led into spaces? Because He's the one who gives us the courage. He's the one who gives us the insight, the wisdom. We are not the ones leading the way. It is God's Spirit that leads us way into the future. So with that being said, I definitely recommend it. And it certainly has sort of a quote on every page that you could take with you into your leadership meetings. And the principle and what he outlines is really important. Edwin Friedman is the founding thinker, or one of the founding thinkers of looking at things from a systems point of view. And I do think that is the future. We need to think about ourselves, going back to Dale's book, about how we are connected to one another, about how even within our own selves is a system of different modes and archetypes, and how they interact with one another. It is about interrelativity, not about me and doing whatever I want, negating the reality that when I pull on something, it tugs at something else. And we are all connected in the web of life. We are all part of this planet. We are all part of the universe. We are all a part of something. And I think that something is God. He's the thing that is holding us all together. So our job is to dive deeply into the Lord and into the oneness of creation and see and live out of that place. And that is what gives us the courage to do things we had never thought of previously. Hopefully these books are helpful to you in this day and age. Leave a comment, please subscribe. If you are interested in more books that I come across that would be helpful for you and for your own faith journey, or the people that you're leading down the faith journey. Have a wonderful day.